The result is a polished, emotionally persuasive pep rally that leaves listeners who look for answers drained at best. Why would you listen to this? All right, now, final verdict on the PKD Foundation's new PKD Chronicles.
The premier source of patient-centered information on PKD and how to reverse it. This is Felix Mueller.
Hello everybody, this is Felix, your friendly neighborhood kidney hacker, coming back today with another special episode. So this one is about the new PKD Foundation podcast. So there's a new kid on the block. Finally, the PKD Foundation has decided it wants to put on a regular podcast. Now, surely this will be packed full of actionable advice for patients, right? Right? Well, this first episode of the podcast centers on an interview of Sharita and Greg. She actually recently received a kidney, and Greg also has PKD and is now a transplant coordinator. Over almost an hour, they talk about their experiences for listeners who are already living with a transplant or tethered to dialysis and don't feel like they have hope. This episode might have some value. But it looks like the PKD Foundation have actually lost the plot on the vast majority of people that are listening and that are trying to halt or reverse their progression, as we do, right? So first, let's call out the elephant in the studio. The show hosts are two kidney transplant recipients whose entire PKD worldview was forged on the dialysis to transplant conveyor belt. So right off the bat, this focuses the conversation on a post-failure narrative where the only solutions are donor registries and pharma sponsorships and feel-good fundraisers, where your own kidneys have long since been swapped out, glucose and ketone levels, metabolic processes, and cyst growth inhibitors are just painful reminders of a missed opportunity. Through no fault of their own, of course, but that blind spot really seeps into every minute of this episode. So right from the beginning, we get this big grateful nod to Otsuka Pharmaceuticals, the company that sells the one FDA-approved PKD drug, tolvaptan, running well into high five figures a year for most patients. And that sponsorship gives everything a certain taste. The entire episode is drenched in feel-good language. You're courageous, you're not alone, find community. For nearly an hour, it quickly becomes clear nobody's going to offer any concrete advice to slow cyst growth, no talk of ketones, oxidative stress, inflammation, the Warburg effect, none of it. Sharita talks about how she was living the typical eat whatever I want lifestyle. Then she collapses from a cyst rupture, starts on meds, and of course, no professional ever paused to ask what her diet might be doing to her blood pressure or her kidneys. Nutrition, glucose control, metabolic drivers, no airtime. And then there's the framing of dialysis and transplant as the unavoidable end game. We hear heartfelt stories about waiting lists and heroic donors, but the idea that a ketogenic diet protocol could delay or even prevent that plunge never occurs to any of the hosts or guests. One host says you can't detect early progression with a simple blood test. While that is true, we actually have MRI as a sure sign of progression, and even that doesn't really matter because everyone with PKD really needs to do the same basic things with diet and lifestyle. But admitting that would force the conversation towards lifestyle interventions, which apparently is not on the script for this, and probably not for any other episodes of this podcast. The insidious fact about it is that it weaponizes emotion, personal stories, used as the meat of the episode, while actionable science is nowhere to be found. And after almost 50 minutes, the big call to action is, you guessed it, donate to the foundation. No invitation to do your own research, no link to webinar or metabolic therapy. Just funnel your goodwill and your money back to the same machine that keeps patients blind and paying. At one point, the guest says, but what can I do to engage productively? Yeah, what can't you do? I wonder. Maybe read some science on reversing PKD? No. So she continues, what kind of small opportunities are there that can warm you up to bigger opportunities? So simple conversations with strangers on a bus or talking to your family, educating others, just even saying the words out loud to somebody else to say, yes, I have PKD. Let me tell you a little bit about it. No, that's not it. Absolutely. You can engage productively. Telling a stranger you have PKD won't do it though. You can change your diet today. Swap the carby comfort food for steak with butter and lots of veggies drenched in MCT oil. Shorten your eating window to 6 to 8 hours. Track your glucose and ketone levels, and you'll do more for your kidneys in 1 week than talking to someone on a bus will ever do in a lifetime. Guys, these big foundations and corporations have been keeping us sick, uninformed, and paying for way too long. They use something called moral self-licensing against us, which means we pay some money or go on a run for some cause and we think someone else will solve it for us. They will never solve it. They profit from it. It's not like they don't know about keto. I've talked to several of these foundations around the world for a decade now. They don't care, guys. So stop giving money to people that will never solve your problem. Do your own research and get empowered, Sharing your diagnosis is fine for solidarity, but sharing info on diet and lifestyle that truly slows, halts, and reverses PKD is how you actually move the needle. And for yourself and for the next person on the bus who overhears the conversation, it can really make a difference. All right, now, final verdict on the PKD Foundation's new depressing podcast, PKD Chronicles. 1.5 stars out of 5. And the name says it all. The show's promise is to help you live your best life with PKD. Yet every story and sponsor and call to action brings listeners closer to the fear of the inevitable monster, dialysis and transplant, wrapped in flattering talk about courage. That fear pivots neatly into a donation appeal, money that won't fund truly disruptive science, but will keep the tolvaptan cash cow going. Remember, this drug is just an old vasopressin blocker they rebadged for PKD, and now they retested in endless post-marketing studies. They're not engaged in studying any new PKD treatment molecules. The hosts are both transplant survivors, so they naturally frame every struggle as a march toward the surgical finish line. Their experience leaves a huge gaping hole, which is diet, lifestyle, and supplements. Any early-stage interventions simply don't exist in their vocabulary. And the result is a polished, emotionally persuasive pep rally that leaves listeners who look for answers drained at best. Why would you listen to this? I mean, really, it's a constant barrage of fear porn trying to come off as supportive. If you try to program your subconscious that nothing can be done, then this might be the way to do it. Just listen to people with bad outcomes interviewed by people with even worse outcomes. This kind of show really is the definition of victim mentality. You condition yourself to expect failure, and then they applaud your bravery for accepting it. It's kind of like hypnosis. Just rehearse other people's worst days until you internalize it for yourself. So by all means, cue it up if you need a virtual hug and a reminder that an organ donation can save your life. But you already know that. If you're looking for tactics to keep your own kidneys functional, skip the sponsor-approved storytelling. Spend that hour learning about keto, mTOR, autophagy, intermittent fasting, red light therapy, supporting the PKD Foundation and thereby Otsuka in hopes of groundbreaking PKD science makes about as much sense as waiting for a steak at a vegan restaurant. If you're less interested in chronicling PKD and more interested in the perspectives that are not tied to any huge pharmaceutical company, you might want to listen to the next episode of the Reversing PKD podcast, in which I'll be sitting down with Mark Lintern, the UK citizen scientist and award-winning author behind the cell suppression theory of cancer, which is a model that spotlights how fungal toxins can trigger tumor growth. It actually builds upon Professor Seyfried's metabolic theory of cancer, who I've had on the podcast in the past, but Mark's theory actually mimics what I think is happening in PKD even closer. In our conversation, we'll unpack how the same levers like ketogenic eating, targeted antimicrobials, gut remediation, and other things can stop growth in solid tumors and possibly in cystic kidneys. And more importantly, what you can start doing today before any other marketing department tells you there's nothing you can change. Don't miss it. Until the next time, happy healing.